welcome all of our guests that have joined us today. I know your days are busy, so taking some time to do this, we appreciate. My name is Terry, and I'll be your host today. And we're on session 3 of our CISO Cyber Series. This week, we'll be talking about vulnerability scanning, patching, and remediation. Why do we only do the sexy part? I'm going to start out with a couple of housekeeping items before I pass it over to the guys here. One of them being, if you have technical support issues, either send me a Q&A or you can send me an email to at terry@savitar.ai. We are also recording this. You should have gotten a notice about all of that. If you want to pass this on to a colleague or refer to it later, we do post this up to our YouTube channel. So that will be available tomorrow, and we'll also post it up to LinkedIn so you can see if you get the direct link to that. The other things that you need to know about is everybody's on mute, but we do like questions. So either drop those into the chat pane or the Q&A pane, and we'll answer those along the way. And then when we get to the actual Q&A portion of this, we'll open it up so you can ask actual questions to the panelists. Let me flip over one more slide here. I can get it to move today. I want to introduce you to our panelists. First of all, we have Corey White, who's the founder and CEO of Savitar. We have Kevin McDonald today. He's the Chief Operating Officer at Alvaca Patchworks. I have Craig Goodwin. He is the Chief Trust and Risk Officer over at Fujitsu. And I have Quincy Collins, the Chief Security Officer at Shepherd Mullen Richter in Hampton. Corey, I'm going to pass this over to you.
All right, fantastic, thank you. So we've got a great panel, and yeah, as you could tell if you joined a little earlier, we talk for a while and go back and forth with the topics we have on hand. I'll be the moderator, and the important people, the CISOs here, will be doing most of the talking. So that said, let's get started and let's talk about the real purpose around this is really helping a lot of organizations and also helping the community. So let's switch to our charities. So as you guys know, Savitar is key for us to give back, and that's what we're about, being socially responsible and also a cybersecurity company. And you know, table stakes is giving to people that need just, you know, basic, you know, Maslow hierarchy of needs is, you know, food, water, shelter, all those things. But the food bank, and just knowing that there are people in LA that aren't nearly as fortunate as all of us are, and especially the children that, you know, get paid and get food from school, and they're not in school, is important. So, you know, we Savitar, we've already donated 25,000 meals, and as we continue to grow, a portion of our revenues will be donated to the food bank, so that we are continuing in that effort. And so every time we do one of these webinar series, we bring in several partners, and we have Kevin from one of our partners over at Patchworks. And we ask them, or frankly require them, hey, we're going to be a part of this. We're donating, you guys are donating to, what's your charity? And I'm handing it over to Kevin, and he's, you know, I love the fact that his charity, you know, is a good counter to our charity. They kind of, you know, frankly feed off of each other. So I want to take a few minutes for him to talk about that, which is really, really important charity.
So thank you for that. And I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation and also to benefit to really good organizations. I want to start with something that's important. Crime Survivors has been confused in the last few years with another group that claims to be crime survivors, and that one is the Crime Survivors, the real one, crimesurvivors.org. They are truly about crime victims and recovery and restoration. It's founded by Patricia Wins-Kunis, whose personal trainer sexually assaulted and tried to kill her in 2002. And she has since then spent her life literally helping and rescuing criminals, victims from various crimes, from domestic violence to human trafficking to dealing with the sadness of families that have lost children to murder, and parents and brothers and sisters and so on. I used to be on their board of directors. I am still on their advisory board. Just for full disclosure, they are an amazing organization. Platinum GuideStar, so they spend the vast majority of their money on what their goals are. And I just think today, with a lot of the victims are suffering because we're releasing criminals from jail, and they thought they were safe and now they don't feel that they are. So there's more need for resources for them. And of course, as the economy gets tougher, it's going to get tougher for people, and they tend to do things with petty crime and so on and so forth. So thank you for the opportunity to support that organization. They are truly amazing. And this organization comes from a heart, unlike many that I've seen, and this is a real not-for-profit, has a fantastic resource center here in Orange County, and it is one that we all should support.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, let's dive in. Like I said, the important stuff where is really the charities, and then secondarily, way further down the line, we all are drinking nice wine or cheap wine, and we had a nice debate on what nice wine actually is. and so for me, I'm doing Trader Joe box wine, and Craig is pacing himself because it's an important day for his wife, and so he's pacing himself with beer. And Kevin has was it an $18 bottle of wine?
Yeah, under 40. Let's just say that. Yeah.
Well, no, he said 40.
Under 40.
I don't go down now.
By the way, I got a note. The CISO beard here. If you look at my original photograph when I started Alvaca, it wasn't gray. So I became CISO a number of years ago, and the gray came from it, and the loss of hair right here too. So yeah.
That means you're trying too hard.
That's right. It's very stressful.
All right. So Quincy was saying that he's done what is impossible, and knock on wood, he's been there 5 years. And 5 years as a CISO is just unheard of, because now I can get some shit to Craig. Like, was he turn over every 2-3 years or so?
Wait, right. This is the third webinar. And it's the third webinar and the second time I've been called out on my length of tenure, right? So this is not good. It's not going the right way.
It is like, the industry average is like 18 months and you're over that. So you should be pretty happy about that.
That's true. Right? Very true. I'm over that 4 or 5 times, so I'm living the dream.
I think I have the COO installation. I'm the CISO for Alvaca, but I'm also the COO, so I'm not likely to fire myself. So
many hats you wear.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure you've got a couple more jobs on the side too.
Yeah, doing the nonprofit consulting takes a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so diving into the topics here, I've been, as you guys know, doing cybersecurity for 25 years, and for pretty much all of those 25 years, and I don't know what's gonna happen this summer, I've gone to Black Hat DEF CON, right? And I've seen the same people every single year, and just grew and grew every single year. But there's no patching, there's no remediation conference, there's no conference on really the most important stuff. I mean, we've seen all the commercials on TV where they say, hey, you go to the doctor and it says, yeah, you got a broken leg, and then the doctor walks away. That's just the same thing. Let's say, hey, your applications are insecure, or your, you have all these vulnerabilities that externally, and then you walk away, hand in the report and walk away. And that's been our industry, and that's the sexy, cool stuff that everybody talks about. Hey, look at this APT group. We talked about the bears earlier. Look at all, but the sexy stuff should be fixing it, putting the cast on the leg and remediating it. Why are we not talking about that? Is that like a major failure in cybersecurity?
It is. It is. And I have to come from the perspective of also, if you take the right steps, you don't break the leg in the first place. You eat a little calcium, you take your careful steps, and you don't jump off buildings that are too big. I mean, there's a point where if we do this right, we shouldn't have to be doing the medicine, as you put it, right? So I think the bottom line is it's hard. It takes time. It's usually after hours and out of play for patching, for example. It takes a lot of planning if you're going to do it right. You can push and pray if you want, but that's a good way to break an organization. And a lot of people find the fear higher to do the patching than they do to just hope and pray they don't get hacked. And I think it's a large part of why we're seeing so many breaches today. Almost every organization we walk into that's been breached and has a failure, or at least weaknesses in the patching arena.
So Quincy, how you solve it?
Well, I think you have to have a multi-pronged approach, right? So you've got to categorize your assets first, right? You've got to categorize it between your critical assets, your assets that are, you know, just standard, and then your lower priority assets. Then you have to take a look at all of your vulnerabilities and all of the sources in which you're going to be pushing those from. Is it going to be a manual push? Is it going to be a is it going to be an automated push, or using SCCM, using some, you know, third-party patch management software, or are you going to have to outsource that due to scalability, right? So essentially, you've got to have a plan, and it first starts with understanding your environment and understanding your assets. Taking a look at your assets in the DMZ, taking a look at your assets that are BYOD, how do you handle those? And then taking a look at your internal assets as well. So you have to have a multi-pronged approach, and you really have to have an overall strategy, whether it's internal only and just using your people, or you're going to be outsourcing that activity due to scares or due to the risk. Because you've got, it's all about weighing the risk, right? In the end, you have to weigh the risk of either patching these vulnerabilities very slowly, or the risk of, you know, bringing in external parties to do that as well. And what are you going to do to treat those risks? How will you mitigate those risks that that will eventually, or that could appear by allowing, you know, outside individuals inside to your network to essentially help you, right? So you've got to weigh all of those out and treat those risks appropriately.
Yeah, I think there's probably one more even fundamental step before we start to do that, right? I think if you think about the strategic piece that you talked about, Quincy, I think as a function, as a security function, and particularly as a CISO, you need to decide what your endpoint of doing those things is. What's the outcome that you want from even starting to patch, right? And I think too many CISOs, too many security functions are focused on just identifying the gaps, right? What is it we need to find that's wrong, you know? And we joked about it a little bit yesterday, but I still see too many of my peers, and I would challenge a lot of CISOs. We talked about tenure, right? I know we joke about mine, but you see a lot of our peers walk away from jobs and say, well, you know, I did loads of great stuff, but no one was listening to me, you know? They just wouldn't, the business just wouldn't listen to me. I told them how bad it was. I told them everything was out of date, but no one was listening to me. And they say that as a blame game. They say that's the business's fault, right? I think number one on that action list for a CISO has got to be internalizing that and making it their responsibility and their team's responsibility. And we touched on culture the other day, to drive those risks down, right? To whether it's remediate, whether it's mitigate, whether it's decide not to do anything about them, the function, the security function I'm talking about, should be objectivized about removing or mitigating those risks, not just identifying the problems. And I think that's something that we have to really internalize as security professionals and security functions before we can move forward.
Yeah, to Quincy's point, what's important too is we come in as an outsider every time, because that's what we do. We have to do our own, and we don't have the challenge here because it's the zero tolerance. We just, patching is part of what we have to do, especially because we're such a target. But the reality comes to your point, is we need to get executive sponsorship in order to do this in most environments, because lawyers, for example, I'm just going to use your example, are not real tolerant of systems not being up at night when they're trying to work, or even on the weekends or whatever. So part of the program has to be getting them to understand the importance of it, the benefits to them as a business, one, protecting their clients' information, and two, making systems better and more efficient, and all the things that you need to do to convince them the business program. But also, you do have to give them a little of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I like to say, no, you know, don't sell with it, but if you're not fearful, uncertain, and doubtful in today's world, you're not paying attention. And a little bit of that fear, there's only a few things that motivate people. That's fear, hunger, love, you know, desire for sex. So we got to find something that motivates them, or greed, and if whatever works, but we have to convince them. So I do believe it starts with the business proposition. It starts with the team believing that this is an important function, because it takes work and it's constant. It's not something that ever goes away. People say, you just patch. No, you're always patching. If you're doing it right, you're kind of like in a constant flow of patching. There's the change control and the acceptance and the asset identity. And the impacts downstream and upstream and all the things you have to figure out. I mean, these are not things that just happen. So it does take commitment.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about motivation, Kevin. You know, I think one of the other things that I always think about, whether it's patching or anything else that you're trying to get someone to do, there are always other reasons as well. And it's easy for security professionals to think ours is the most important reason, right? And it might be, we might be right, but there are lots of other motivating factors and reasons why people do things, right? And it might be uptime, to your point. You know, they're going out of, it might be a cost decision. It might be based on cost of cloud versus on-prem. You know, whatever these ROI decisions are based on why we're patching, actually piggyback as much as you can. You know, as a CISO, don't be precious about the fact that you're the one that's driving these. Yes, you're a contributor to it, but actually, if there's a business factor that's driving that transformation or that change or that cultural change, then piggyback on that as much as you can.
Yeah.
You have to align yourself fully to the business. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to point out that we may all be wrong with this because, Kevin, you said something really important.
No.
You said, you know, there's a key driver here. You said the desire for sex. And so patching and remediation is not sexy.
Right.
We got to figure out a way to incorporate it into being sexy some kind of way, because that's the big challenge of it is it's not sexy. It's not fun. And it becomes a cultural issue that, you know, we need to get over, where, you know, if I wore a patching and remediation t-shirt, you know, around, and people walk around high-fiving me.
Yeah.
For the last, 20 years, I get my wife a t-shirt from DEF CON. I get a friend to pick it up for me. But she walks around with a DEF CON t-shirt, and then people are like, oh, it's cool to people to know what it is. But if it said patching and remediation, she probably get laughed at. So we got to fix that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so the sexy stuff here, the sexy stuff that, you know, we're talking about, or that we're deriving from Black Hat, B-Sides, and all those other conferences are, you know, the penetration testers, the really cool, you know, blue team type activities, red team type activities, and all of that. Whenever I speak to college students that have just got out of you know, computer science area, they all want to be penetration testers, right? They all want to be that, you know, Mr. Robot. They all want to be you know, they all want to be a superhero. So I think, you know, we have to kind of take it upon ourselves to always mention, hey, you know, patching is really important. You know, whatever articles that it is that we're writing, whatever, you know, wherever it is that we're speaking, we need to speak about patching, because we've all heard the quote, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So this is a 1-for-1. This is like for like. If you patch your systems, those exploits, at least the ones that we know about, aren't going to be able to get your system, and you're going to give yourself a little bit more time to see these things happening in your environment, block those IPs, block those hashes, block, you know, whatever it is that you've got to block and change in order to decrease the level of risk in your environment. So, you know, you got to take a look at your business. What does your business need? You know, your security controls and your security strategy has to align directly with the business. You have to take a look at patching, you have to take a look at compliance, you have to take a look at everything. But in the end, you are a function of the business as a security practitioner. So we can't lose sight of that.
Yeah, and I have to, go ahead.
No, go Kevin, you go for it.
I was gonna say, I have to, full disclosure, guys, I have to admit the sexy stuff is the fun stuff. I mean, I've done physical break-in. I mean, literally burglarizing places and getting paid for it is the coolest thing in the world. I love doing it. I would do it all day if I was allowed to. Putting on a bulletproof vest and going over a fence in the middle of the night, it's a blast. But it's not the reality of security. It's a component of letting people know you can't focus on just what you know. You have to make sure you focus on all of it. And that's why I do the physical stuff, because I've proven to people, you spend $1 million on fences and firewalls and that, and a guy like me walks in with a pick and figures out where the cameras are and aren't. I'm in the facility playing around with your equipment before you know what happened to you. So, but I do agree, we need to make it, the sexy to me is winning. The sexiest thing for a CISO, this is serious, the sexiest thing for a CISO is to know they've never had a reportable breach. We've all had our incidents, but to be able to say, I've never had a breach, to me is the sexiest thing. That shows you are good at what you do. And you're working the right, because everybody's a target. Nobody can claim. I love when I see owners saying, well, I'm not a target. Oh, yes, you are. Every single computer in the world is a target right now. So
Yeah.
I think,
okay, well,
I wish that sexiness thing worked elsewhere, Kevin, because
yeah, I know, it's true.
I think it might only be this webcast.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't get dates, that's for sure. But luckily I've been with the same girl since I was in high school.
so, the thing is this:
What?
we got the whole freaking industry saying your breach is inevitable. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And so every single security product, you know, not everyone, but 95% of them probably, they point out your problems. Like, hey, here's more risk. Here's another, you know, risk that we've identified. But they don't spend nearly as much time building into their products the remediation pieces or
Yeah.
helping you to remediate. Or
And that's the hard bit. Yeah.
It
that's
is.
the hard bit.
And it's the last 5%, because a lot of people want to remediate, but then there's always that last 5% that you can always find a reason why it didn't happen. And for me, when I'm doing leadership in this stuff, pushing people over that 5% is what I focus a lot of my energy on, is getting them past that last hard detail, whatever it might be that needs to get done, whether it's part of the planning or verifying that your patch is actually applied and didn't override another patch, or whatever it is, final things that are really critical to making sure security is actually working.
Yeah, and that's success for a CISO for me, right? Is getting that extra 5%, because, you know, we've talked about it at length, but you think about, it's the same as that compliance versus security conversation that we had on previous webcasts. You know, you think about that, and it's a similar thing. I can say I'm running a threat and vulnerability management program, right? Fantastic. But actually, the proof is in the pudding. Am I actually reducing any risks? Is anything disappearing as a result of doing and running that program, right? Am I helping the business? One of the things that I've seen be successful is, to Quincy's point about aligning with the business. If you look at the people that are already doing that job, right? So flip it on its head almost. Just stop recruiting people into security that are outsiders and get them excited about being pen testers, and actually take the people that are already doing the patching and recruit them into the security army, right? They're already doing it. If you look at what you're trying to achieve with your particular function, right? Whether it's application security and you're talking to the development teams, if it's infrastructure security and you're talking to the IT or infrastructure teams, reach out to those teams and get those guys excited about security. Offer them the knowledge of the security team. You know, maybe it's a rotational job thing, or maybe it's just sharing knowledge, whatever it is. But then you're getting the people that are already not very sexy and promise to make them sexier, right? By giving them that security knowledge. And I think, you know, we've seen that in a lot. And there used to be a joke in my old team about recruiting people into the security army or recruiting people into Craig's army, right? Because you go out to the business, you find the people that are good and doing what they're doing, build relationships there. It's a cultural thing. It's a soft skills thing more than it is a technical thing. But build those barriers and build those relationships, and then influence those people to do what you need them to do, instead of trying to own everything yourself.
Yeah.
So
everyone have the passion to get it right.
Oh yeah. Everyone on your network is a part of your security team, an extension of your security team. They might not be tip of the spear, but they're a part of it, however far back they might be. What I found to be very helpful is sharing, information sharing, console sharing. You might not allow write access to certain things. You might not allow individuals in a certain team to execute scripts or commands or what have you, but at least you can have a dashboard and says, hey, this is how you're doing. You can have revolving reports. This is, you know, this is how you stack. And what I've also found to be very helpful is comparing one department to the next and say, hey, this is the whole entire body of, you know, whatever it is that we're looking at, whether it's patch management or, you know, protocols that are allowed, disallowed, and just saying, hey, this is where you stack compared to the rest of you all. So turn it into a little bit of a competition, but, you know, in the end, we're really on the same bus here. You know, it's all about getting everybody on the bus, everybody in the same direction, on the same team. And you really don't want to exclude people if you don't have to. So bring everybody in, share information where you can, and that will build a lot of, you know, that'll build a lot of partnership. And I found that to be very, very helpful.
I want to add to, if you don't mind, I couldn't support more what you just said. The competition thing is very interesting. We started with BI dashboard several years ago now, and even between shifts, the people that have the lower response times to an incident, the people that have less unfinished tasks when it comes to patching, those are on huge screens in the network operations center. So everybody sees it. All the management team gets sent reports on where we are on status, what patching didn't go, what failed, what service, because I'm a full service MSP. Patchworks is a major component of what we do, but we actually do full service monitoring and all that. And so my team has a lot going on. That competition is fantastic. And the transparency for the effort is huge, because you cannot deny what is right in front of your face. So it's really important to make sure people can see it, because it's really easy out of sight, out of mind in this stuff. You have so much going on in the tyranny of the urgent. If it's not right in front of you, reminding you, you're going to miss it.
It's all about communication, right? It's the ways and means you communicate things and how you use communication as an effective tool to drive your agenda, right? And it's that last 5%. Sorry, Corey.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no worries. So it sounds like what you, Craig and Quincy and everybody's saying on the call is that if you're a technical CISO, you're doing it all wrong. You just go, you should pack it up and just stop. You know,
I definitely didn't say that.
Business,
run,
political, you should be a politician, right? And recruit people into your campaign. Is that what we're saying?
You know, I think there are a number of different facets of being a CISO. One is, you know, really being a business person, a business driver, someone who's very aligned with the business. Additionally, there's another person who is very, you know, ingrained in security controls and the nitty gritty. And then the third person is, you know, somebody who's very, very adept at privacy, compliance, things like that. So you really have to be all things in order to get in order to be full strength from a CISO perspective, right? Because you have to consider all of these things. You have to consider the business. You have to consider security best practices, and you have to consider privacy and compliance. So, you know, without those three legs, you know, you're really, you know, not at full strength. And I would challenge anyone to really take a look at where they might be lacking, right? So this goes back to, you know, what's not sexy, right? Patching is not sexy, right? Also, you know, looking at, you know, certifications and, you know, new different things, and, you know, looking at, you know, like cloud, or looking at different types of things. It's not particularly sexy, but it's very, very helpful. So you've got to kind of bridge the gap from a technical perspective. You got to bridge the gap from a privacy and compliance perspective. And then you really have to take a look at the business itself. So you have to form those relationships that help you get there, because you can't get there by yourself. Right? Yeah. So it's communication, it's knowledge, both technical and non-technical. And then we're talking about compliance and the other stuff, which definitely isn't sexy, but it's so very helpful. If you have all of your ducks in a row, you know, hopefully this won't happen to anybody, but let's say somebody has a breach. If you have your ducks in a row, you have all of your processes and procedures in place, this is going to get you way far and above an organization that is at step 0 and hasn't even started with all of their knowledge gathering activities and processes and all of that. So technical, it's good to be technical, but it's better to be all things.
Yeah, and
I think we need to have a big buzzer for every time someone says it depends on needs to be a big buzzer coming up that says it depends. I think, I think Quincy's spot on. I think you've got to be a bit of that Swiss Army knife, right? I think it's like, I'd say it like this. It's like any leader, you know, you look at CEOs, CFOs, whatever you want to do, and there's all manner of different knowledge, all manner of different capabilities at the CEO level as well. You have tech CEOs running tech firms, you have financial CEOs running CEO firms, and they can all succeed. The difference is knowing as a leader how to build the team around you, I think. And, you know, some larger companies have the opportunity to do this perhaps and have larger teams. Others, perhaps they're on their own, but you can utilize other parts of the business to build your team. I think it's about being honest with yourself about the type of leader and CISO that you are. So if I don't have the technical depth, who's my number 2 hire every time? A technical right-hand man who can help me to communicate to the business and the technical teams.
And I think that's huge. And I think the point of being all around, if you can't ask if you're not technical enough to ask the right question, then you really shouldn't be doing it. I don't expect you to be an engineer, and I'm not. Everybody that knows me, I'm not. But I will ask very deep, critical questions of what they're telling me so that I can make sure what I'm being told is the result I'm looking for, right? Mm-hmm. So, but having technical people I can trust and who tell me the truth is really, really, really critical to everything that we do here. I need to be able to walk in and ask a straight question and get a straight answer, and then walk away knowing what I was just told is accurate. That to me is and you have to have they have to trust you as a leader to do that, because they want to know. I used to tell people all the time early on in the relationships with my staff, and many have been here for a decade or longer, you're never going to get in trouble for telling me the truth. You will get in trouble for not telling me what you know. So always keep that in mind. I don't have any problem with the truth. Pain, it hurts, whatever. But if I find out you had information you held back from me that cost me or a client or this company, not going to go well for you. So, and the trust level here is so high. It is why I think why we're so successful. So, and then the business point, if you don't have a business understanding and the impacts about what you're trying to do, I think no organization or no part of an organization has less power on some levels than a CISO if they don't have relationships and they haven't developed teams. You're not going to get it done. It's not going to happen. So that personalized and team building effort is number one as far as I'm concerned in everything that you do as a CISO. And you have to be able to deal with people and conflicts of need and interest, and the cross-platform desires of everybody, and what you're trying to do might slow down or interfere slightly with what they're doing. I mean, these are very important factors of being a CISO.
You've got to have those soft skills, right? Yeah. So hard skills, everybody can, get a CISSP, everybody can get have a CS computer science degree, but not everybody can understand if, your star engineer is having a bad day, or maybe they're, having some troubles with, interpersonal troubles with other engineers, maybe in other departments, things like that. So you've got to have that eye and those soft skills in order to really keep your team cohesive. You got to know when to hit that gas pedal, and then you've got to know when to hit that brake as well. Yep. And, communication, once again, is key. If you have open lines of communication, both formal and informal communication, and really just building that rapport. So you don't always have to communicate, in order to have an end goal. You can communicate just to communicate, right? You're not going to be friends with the folks that you work with, right? But you are going to be colleagues. You are going to be coworkers. You are going to have a great working relationship. And, those soft skills, if a CISO can really develop those, and I'm developing my skills every single day, as is every other CISO out there. It's very, very important to have a continuous improvement mantra, whether it's technical, non-technical, whether it's hard skills, soft skills, everything. Once again, you've got to be like water, right? You've got to be malleable. You've got to be able to fit in any situation and really come out, not necessarily on top, but make sure that the business comes out on top.
That's true.
Quincy, how do you not get labeled draconian?
I was going to say that.
Oh, okay.
I got it. Love it.
So, I think from a CISO perspective, you have to be okay with being called draconian. You have to be okay with being called old school. You have to have very, very thick skin, because some of the security controls that you're going to implement in your environment, people aren't going to like. It's going to be inconvenient. It's going to be, it's going to take an extra 2 clicks. You gotta wait for the 2-factor code. But what's the alternative, right? The alternative is possibly a breach, possibly, reportable breach, anything could happen. So you have to communicate it in a certain way to allow everyone to understand that you're on their side. And it's a we thing. It's not I'm telling you to do something. It's a us. It's a business thing. We're making this decision as a business because of this, that, and the third, right? You can't come into a room and say, I'm gonna take that away. I'm gonna take that away. You have to be very careful with your communication, and you have to be very transparent. If it's something that they're not gonna like, you're gonna have to tell them, right? You're gonna have to be straight up, tell the truth. The easiest thing to do is just show up and tell the truth. And that, to me, has paid dividends, right? You have to be very truthful with your users. You have to be very open and honest and transparent. They should be able to give you a call, hopefully not all at the same time. Whenever I send out all firm user emails, I definitely get a couple of emails and calls back, but that's to be expected. So, there's got to be a certain expectation there. But at the same time, you have to keep your eye on the prize, and that prize is a very secure tomorrow for your organization.
Well, and you think of things like you mentioned doing the groundwork, right? So there's a couple of things there. I think I always think of the analogy. I think someone told me the story, so I won't claim it was me that participated in this, but it was a story about talking to a CIO, right? And the analogy of encrypting laptops, and you say, well, you've got to go and encrypt all your laptops, or maybe databases is a better example, whichever technical example you want to choose. And the CIO says, absolutely not, can't possibly do that. I can't encrypt them all, it's too expensive, it'll take too much time, right? So you go away for a bit and you come back and you say, well, that's fine. Just find where the sensitive data is, and actually you only need to encrypt that. And the CISO goes away for 2 days, comes back, and the CIO's dumbfounded, you know, he's a bit gutted, and he goes, well, I'm just going to have to encrypt all of them because I can't tell you.
I love it.
And you go, well, look, I achieved what I wanted to achieve, but he thinks he made the decision, right? And that all right, maybe you could argue that's a bit subversive, but at the same time, I think it articulates the way that you need to get things done, right?
No,
and I think to your point, Quincy, about different people for different situations, you know, the CISO, you're never going to be the same person in an incident. You need to, and in fact, go back to the podcast or the webcast we did with Malcolm Harkins. I forget his model, and he won't like me for that, but he's got a good model that articulates what we're trying to say, right? Which is the difference between being a different person in different situations. You know, that high level strategic person who brings the team along with them, you know, buys a Starbucks card and takes all the execs out for a coffee to build relationships. It's not the same guy that's going to deal with a breach, right? Not the same guy who's going to be there in an incident and take good, strong decisions when they're needed, you know? So you've got to be that chameleon.
And I think to your point about being subversive, I don't, it's interesting because I don't see it being subversive or manipulated to help someone come to a conclusion on their own that meets the business need that you have. Although some people see it that way. Frankly, I think whatever it takes, if you're being honest, whatever it takes to get them to come to that positive conclusion that helps everybody protect themselves. I have to say this, there's not been a lot of conversation about ransomware, and we've been for months now, pretty much that's what this company has been doing a lot of, and we're talking organizations with 40, 50,000 seats, completely unable to work for weeks. Thousands of students at schools can't work. Teachers can't work. They're not getting paid. It is horrifying. We've seen organizations going out of business and disappearing, some from the 1800s that have multifamily generational backgrounds. Why? Because they didn't patch or they didn't have two-factor authentication. Basics, really basic stuff. So I really want to get to that point where it's not about fear, uncertainty, and doubt, it's reality. The reality is 1 in 5 right now are getting ransomware at some point, and 1 in 5 of those won't come back. So we have to do the disaster recovery and the business continuity. We've got to do the patching. We have to do the multi-factor. We got to do the things that are a little inconvenient so that we can all keep our jobs as effective.
Yeah, we had a, you know, we've talked about this a couple of times, Corey, and I think everything that you're talking about, Kevin, comes back again to the basics, right? And I know everyone gets bored of me. Certainly if you listen to more than one webcast, you're bored of this conversation. But I think, you know, for too long, the industry has been, because it's VC-led and vendor-led, has been, as an end user CISO, has been driven towards the AI, ML, the sexy stuff, again, in the vendor space, right? And we know, Kevin, from most of the threats and risks that we see out there, that actually 90%, picking a number for the sake of illustrating a point, but 95% of the things that go wrong can be avoided by doing the basic things. And I do think in RSA, there was a little bit of a shift this year, albeit minor or almost imperceptible, back towards that kind of basic stuff, you know. And we've talked about asset management on a previous webcast, you know, we're talking about patching now. This is all stuff that's difficult to do, but if you get it right, it solves a big chunk of what you're worried about as a CISO, you know.
And don't use SU accounts to surf the internet, and don't use because some of the, I mean, and you know, some of these guys are doing really good work and they're just hit by really bad actors. There's been a few big ones that we know of. I'm not sure what I would have done as a CISO to prevent what happened, because it's heavyweight foreign state actor that dedicated themselves to taking what they wanted. But in general, 85-90% of the time, your point is dead on. If we do these things, we can at least sleep about the 90% of the average stuff that's out there coming after us, because it's manually or it's being scanned, or they're doing stuff that's, you know, as soon as they find out you're even slightly secure, they just move on to someone who's not. And it's helpful. And it is hard, but it's not as hard as trying to recover from ransomware. I mean,
low hanging fruit for sure.
So it's all about time spent, right? So how much time is a given organization spending on these preventative activities, right?
Yep.
Or are they spending a lot of their time, effort, funds on, you know, the pie in the sky stuff that sounds cool on paper, but, you know, is it really effective? So I think a lot of organizations, CISOs, CIOs, you know, whoever, really need to take a look at the maintenance, the operations aspect of information security and, you know, the preventative aspect of it and say, hey, how much time are we actually, time, effort, energy, how much of that are we actually dedicating to the things that can prevent a breach rather than the really cool and sexy stuff that we're talking about that, you know, has a really cool console, maybe has, you know, 8 or 9 different machine learning models or AI models associated with it that sounds cool, but may not actually work. And, you know, probably hasn't been vetted. So I think it's all about time spent, energy spent.
I think it's a couple things that we're going to segue into questions from the audience here. But one thing that I think we all agree upon is we need to do a better job of in cybersecurity is the cultural and also political side of it. Because, and this ties into the question that someone is asking. And again, if you have more questions, please chime in the Q&A session here. But what I've seen is that everybody knows that you should be patching, but they're afraid to patch because, yeah, if a system comes down and it affects the business, that'd be horrible, obviously. But what I've seen is that the actual politics of it is what stops CISOs from moving forward with really pushing that agenda of doing the right thing and what they should be doing or putting controls around it. And so how do you get over that fear of the politics? Like if we do a patch or if something goes wrong, then all of a sudden we cannot do another patch because I got to go through all this, you know, political capital. I think that's severely affecting CISOs being successful. And then we'll dive into open questions.
Yeah, I think firstly so the first point would be the aspect of the question, which is why are CISOs not owning that bit? And I think it comes down to the perception of the CISO, right? And I think we've created this for ourselves. I think there's a lack of trust in a CISO to consider the business, right? Because we talked about CISOs still doing fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And the reason that a lot of businesses has hired a CISO is to be that paranoid person who is that voice of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the most part, right? And this is maybe a little bit archaic now, but it still exists. And therefore, why would you then put the hands of the operating business or the live customer facing systems into the hands of someone that's paid to be paranoid? Like, you wouldn't do that because you know the only decision that he's going to make is to protect the business at all costs. So unless you can convince the business that you are a business-minded person who is going to weigh the risk correctly to customers, the business, and security, then they're not going to give you that bullet, you know?
I agree, and
So
I think the view, I'm sorry, Quincy, go ahead.
So there are a lot of ways to do this, but I think one should first start with a policy. You know, you've got to have an agreed upon flow with regard to patch management. So how long does it take to have a critical, a high, medium, including your third-party patches as well. You can't just do the OS patches, right? You got to have a process for both. So I think it all starts with a policy. Once you have an agreed upon framework in which you can point to and say, hey, this is what we're doing, and then have checkpoints to say, hey, you know, why is this, 60 days over? Oh, the agent broke on it. Let's get that agent fixed. Okay, now you're back to a good state. So I think it's about having a policy, having communication in the way of updates and benchmarking. And then third, communication and trust, right? We were speaking a little bit about trust and how, some CISOs might not be trusted with regard to thinking about the business, but in the end, this is a risk management activity. This is a core business activity, right? Because it is a risk to the business if, we take a look at some of the major breaches that occurred over the last, year. A lot of them had to do with publicly available exploits that have been around for a good while and misconfigurations as well. So, we have to really take it step by step, but, take a look at a policy, communication, and then culture. let's put it all together. You're gonna have progress if you
there is a risk to staying the same, right? I like the point there, because I think a lot of businesses, a lot of CIOs think, and it's true most of the time, normally things go wrong as a result of change, right? But actually you've got to convince the business there is a risk to staying the same as well, you know, because I came from the automotive industry before, and I mean, like everyone does, very archaic systems, and dealership groups just wouldn't accept doing anything to them at all, because they potentially damage the live systems, right? But there is a risk to staying the same as well. And I think, you know, you've got to articulate that effectively.
I'll keep it brief. I think there's a couple of things. One, we do have systems now that allow us to do things like creating a snapshot, patching that snapshot, testing, standing it up. We don't have to take the system down in order to do it properly in many environments, at least the more sophisticated ones. I also think that the third-party patching point you made is something we shouldn't roll over really quickly. It's critical, one, that we control rogue apps. One of the things CISOs need to do is to convince the team that it is not okay for anybody outside of the influence of IT to be doing anything and installing anything on a computer. I mean, it's just that simple. They can ask for it and they can demand it, but the bottom line is they shouldn't be doing it, right? And then one last part, I have a distinct advantage in my own place, and I think it's a bit of a conflict as well, but being the COO and the CISO, I can tell myself to do stuff and then go tell the team to do what I need to get done, right? So it does help. On the other hand, I do have that overriding concern all the time about the financial impact of whatever it is that's being asked. The CISO in me knows damn well we need it, but the financial and the operations manager on the other side goes, well, but can we afford it? And do we have the time? And do we have the engineering resource to do it this week and whatever? So it helps.
Yeah, and I think, so that's a really good point, especially when we go back to the point, sorry, Corey, just super fast, is agreeing up front. When we talked about strategy right at the start of the webcast, right? My first thing that I recommend to anyone who goes and even interviews for a CISO job, or if it's your first day on the job, is sit down with whoever controls the purse strings and get a real genuine understanding for what that budget looks like, or what it could look like, right? Because that is the number one thing. We talk about CISO tenure turning over. The number one thing is a complete dislocation on expectations between what the CISO expects versus what the CFO or the finance guy expects.
They're willing to put
in. And if you cannot get what you want to get done, then that's never going to change, and you're going to spend 2 years banging your head against the wall. So that would be number one for me in all of this.
Amen.
Yeah, just to drive home the point of the question we had is, who owns patching? If the CISO doesn't even own patching, the hell can he actually patch, right? And that was a great question. And I've seen that where patching is owned by the application owners or the business owners in that division or whatever. But then if the company gets compromised, then they look at the CISO and like, you're accountable, but you didn't even own patching.
Yeah.
So the CISOs don't own patching per se, but they are accountable for the bad things, the ills of this world that could happen and that could be bestowed upon your network if things go wrong, right? So you have to, it's the CISO's job to take a look at that, address those risks appropriately, and come up with solutions, right? So the solution might not be automated patching every time. The solution might be, hey, these subset of servers will be manually patched due to this, that, and what have you. We'll have these change windows. Okay, what do you need? So a CISO should be asking, hey, what do you need from us as an executive C-suite in order to make this happen when you're talking to your patch management folks? So it's, once again, it kind of boils down to communication, right?
Yeah, and we have a very large environment with 15,000 employees, and they moved to thin client, got tired of patching. I mean, it was like, and by the way, it's worked out beautifully. They have some power users that need the full compute, but most people, they were using Citrix anyway. And so, by getting rid of that, they literally got rid of this nightmare and this political debate that happened every month about when and how and who and how do you do it. So the application issue for me is probably one of the biggest, because the application people are saying you're responsible, which also means they can interfere, meaning, well, we're not going to let it happen right now. And I think that's where that responsibility needs to fall on the CISO. They also need to own, if they force the application management team to push, it's your problem, you're going to own it. But on the other hand, you can't just not do it. You have to patching isn't something you can ignore and just make it, it's not going to go away because you don't want to do it, I guess is the way to put it.
Well, and coming full circle again to your point about business decisions, Quincy and Kevin as well, what's the reason to the thin client example? Take a step back and understand what the real reason is and try and break it down, right? I think too many people go gung-ho, we need to patch, right? Well, let's talk about it a bit more. Sunsetting things is a good example of where you remove all those problems and you remove the business problem at the same time, right?
Right.
Start talking in business language about how much money are we making from that operational system that happens to be up and running. Well, let's not bother going through 3 years of trying to patch it. Let's get rid of it, So there are all these things that need to be considered in a holistic solution as well.
And there are app guard solutions that you can use that you can put on the machine to block vulnerability if you need to. I mean, there are solutions, but bottom line is you can't just leave it vulnerable because it's hard. I think that's the reality. We all know the results of that. And while I think it sucks when people's personal data gets stolen, it is not the same as the existential threat of a severe ransomware attack destroying the organization. I mean, just gone. So we all have to think in reality, and even the breach, if you think the cost, it can be millions and millions of dollars in fines and penalties and loss of trust with clients, and damage from breach is far more severe than whatever work you might have to do to stop them from happening in the first place.
Depending on the type of organization that a ransomware attack has hit, the soft costs can actually turn out to be more than the hard costs, right? So a damage in reputation to certain firms or industries is actually going to be far greater than, and it's going to set that organization back many months or years. It might represent a certain market share, right? So, you take a look at different providers that have been hit, their stock price goes down, right? It does come back up afterwards, but, is that money lost or is it just deferred, right? So, the business really, and sometimes it's very hard to get a business to the point where they have this altruistic look at information security. And sometimes the only reason to do things that you can really point to is it's the right thing to do. This is a best practice. Sometimes you won't have a real quantifiable number to point to and say, hey, this is the cost if something happens, because it all could be a part of the same breach, right? So you can put a number anywhere if you really want to, but in the end, it's the CISO's job to get that over the finish line, whatever that is regarding patch management or security best practices.
Agreed.
Yeah, definitely agree. So in closing, so what Savitar does, and what we've seen, anybody that knows me for the last 25 years, I've been assessment pen testing and deliver the report, project-based work, and I realized the fails of what I've done over the years is that it ultimately doesn't help. I mean, I've had some of my CISO friends say, Corey, hey, yeah, I love doing assessment with you, but I hadn't fixed the assessment from last year that you did. I still have those vulnerabilities. So yeah, I'm thinking about it, I'm like, damn, okay, that's not helping. And some of my best friends, and then again, thank you guys for joining the call, are CISOs. So I want to make sure I'm helping my friends. So I built a business around, you think about the threat and vulnerability management, TVM, life cycle, and just about every company I know is falling down somewhere along the life cycle, whether it be the continuous scanning externally, internally, and then remediation of those scanning, and then those scan results. And then what I've seen is about 60% of them become patch related, and that's why we partnered with Kevin and team around Patchworks and having a managed patching solution, because patching doesn't go away. It's just like vulnerabilities and pen testing. You can't do it one time and hey, check box, I'm done. It needs to be continuous. Patching should be continuous. So you should be able to patch yourself to zero every single month around applications and operating systems.
Yep.
And then what it also leaves is the remediation of the of the non-patch related stuff. And so my team works from a project management perspective of working through and remediating those things. So changing a firewall rule or changing a port or whatever. Usually that's something the internal company wants to do themselves, but they don't actually have a project manager to project manage them down to zero. So the goal is patching to 0 every single month and remediating to 0 every single month. And that's, again, the whole premise around why we've flipped this thing upside down and saying, yeah, we're going to do the unsexy stuff. The pen testing is, yes, wearing the cool scarf, but the patching, I'm going to say, is still wearing the cool scarf. You can be cool. And so that's the ultimate goal of what we're doing. And Kevin, I know we have one slide. I know you can kind of summarize what you guys do at Patchworks as well. But I think I've kind of encapsulated.
Yeah, I'll just keep it to 2 seconds. Bottom line, we help you to work through developing a consistent process to help figure out what are your critical systems, what are the control functions that need to go into change management, which is vitally important, the workflows, the steps to take it down, the steps to bring it back up, who needs to be informed and involved in the decision. So we really do take something that's extremely complex, because the thing about patching, there's nothing simple about it. If you do it right, it's a pretty complex thing, but we make it much more tolerable and much more efficient and at least consistent, so that you can predict and you can behave in a way that is consistent with a requirement of an ongoing security management risk framework. It's that simple.
Makes sense. Well, thank you all. This has been a fantastic talk, and thanks for letting me put you on the spot and throw crap at you and blame you for doing it wrong. And you had great answers coming. So thank you guys, and we'll talk again in the next session next week. Terry, I think you'll close us out.
Thank you. Been a lot of fun.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Up on your screen, you'll see some information about Patchworks. I've also posted the links out in the chat pane, so you can get to those. Next week, we do the next session of our CISO Cyber series. Next week will be on Tuesday, so just note that out and get registered up for that. And if you have questions, that's how you can get in touch with us. I want to thank everybody for attending today.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.